Hey everyone, Tim here from SnapAttack. Let's dig into this week's Threat Snapshot. So today we're going to be talking about the Lorenz Ransomware Group, and in particular one of the tools that they widely use, a network tool called Chisel. So this is some threat intelligence released by our partner Vertium. They've been tracking this threat actor for the last 2 years, and in particular the Lorenz Ransomware Group is going to target a lot of smaller and medium-sized businesses in the United States, Mexico, China. These are sort of the businesses that, again, as a small, medium-sized business, you're definitely not going to have a full SOC. More than likely, you're going to outsource that to an MSSP like a Vertium, or you may even not have a mature security practice, which is what these sort of gangs are looking for and looking to abuse. They are not sophisticated. Again, we're going to take a look at some of their TTPs, and in particular, they're going to use commodity open source tools to achieve their objectives. If you want to learn more about Lorenz specifically, this is a really good blog post talking about this, as well as some of their past flash notices. So definitely take a look. We are going to be talking about and emulating 2 of the pieces of their kill chain, really here in this tactics and techniques section. So I always like to say that, people are worried about ransomware, but it doesn't just appear in your network. You've got to gain initial access, you've got to move laterally, escalate credentials, and then deploy that ransomware widely. So that is the last step in the kill chain. Really, we want to take a look as early as we can for detection and prevention opportunities. So 2 of the tools that they use, Lorenz in particular, are going to be CrackMapExec. This is a tool that helps for lateral movement, whether that's via WMI, via SMB, or other sort of Windows internal mechanisms. And then they're also going to be using Chisel, which we're going to be talking about. So Chisel, it's a kind of a network Swiss Army knife, kind of like a Netcat or SOCAT. But really it's a little bit more mature, has encryption out of the box, emulates HTTP traffic. So over the network, it's going to look just as if it's any other, network communication that's over web traffic. And really it has that server client architecture. So we're going to run the server on our attacker machine. You're going to have the different clients connect back to it. And, just as if you had a reverse proxy, I, as the attacker, can use my victim machine to launch other attacks. So ways that you could get creative here, I could use that victim machine and that foothold to launch an nmap scan, and again, scan that network via Chisel. I could use Bloodhound to enumerate AD and look for weaknesses. I could use some other attack tools if I wanted to exploit other vulnerabilities to, again, gain additional access in the network. It's really just allowing me to run all of those sort of commands as if I was part of that connection. So not having to be actually in the network on-prem, with a VPN. I can use that foothold and use Chisel to, penetrate deeper into the network. So lots of information here if you want to learn more about how Chisel is used. We'll circle back to that in a few minutes here, but want to take a look at the threat in SnapAttack in our threat library. So this is, again, based on real-world intelligence from what we've seen Lorenz and similar threat actors use. They're going to use a Chisel tunnel with CrackMapExec, and in particular, they're going to hide their commands via a DNS text record. So this is, again, a small part of the kill chain that we're going to emulate here. First thing, and I should say we are taking a look here at our attacker machine. We've downloaded and we're going to set up Chisel as a server. We're going to do a reverse SOX proxy. So we're going to ask the client on our victim machine to connect back to us as the attacker. And then we're going to use CrackMapExec to actually get that on the victim machine. So we already have valid credentials in the account. We know our target. We can enter that IP address. We're going to enter that password, and this was a really interesting technique. They're using PowerShell, but instead of having a lot of those commands just very visible on the command line, they are resolving a DNS text record, which is going to have the malicious string, and that is what's actually going to download and install Chisel. So we're over here looking at that Chisel interface. You're going to see right here that session 1 popped up. So our socket server is listening. Again, you could use proxy chains or whatever your tool of choice is on Linux. And now you can proxy over Chisel, and all of your traffic will be coming out of that Windows victim machine. So Chisel itself isn't the malicious tool, but it is going to allow and enable a lot of malicious activity. Certainly could be used for other purposes if you wanted to use this legitimately for doing some kind of networking traffic, just like system administrators can use SSH port forwarding and tunneling. It's really how you use the tool. In particular, we're looking at how some of the threat actors are using this. Lots of different detection opportunities. I'm going to take a look at a couple of those here in a minute. Again, how do we want to hunt for this? How do we want to detect this sort of threat in our network? So a couple of pieces here. I'm not going to dig into lateral movement and CrackMapExec, but because we are using that SMB exec, that's really, again, similar to PSExec. That's why we see services.exe is going to be spawning our CMD. Lots of different detection mechanisms for that. Again, it's going to create that Windows service that's going to launch whatever commands that we want. Really in particular here, again, I want to talk about that PowerShell download cradle, which is then going to run and install Chisel. So we can see here the attacker has renamed Chisel to Tanium Update Service. Again, they're trying to masquerade as a legitimate system process, in particular Tanium being more of an endpoint detection and management tool. But we're going to see from the command line here that client, the IP address. If we go back to our Chisel manual, those are definitely connection strings that we have and configuration options. So this is one of those ripe areas for detection opportunities, and we can also see here that there is an detection here. So going through, how would we hunt for this? How would we detect this? A couple of different ways we can do this. If you do have network detection, network telemetry data, so again, think Bro Zeek data or some sort of NDR. So Chisel by default, and I should say a lot of threat actors are going to just go straight to GitHub to that releases page and download the binary and use that oftentimes, via PowerShell and just downloading that. This is one of those ways that if you have that default binary, there's going to be some strings in the network headers. So like we've mentioned, Chisel is a Golang tool, so you're going to see the Go HTTP client. You're also going to see Chisel as part of one of the HTTP headers. So looking at those is definitely a very high confidence way if you do have network visibility and insight that you could, again, deploy to your tools. If you have an EDR and more on the endpoint detection side, taking a look at those process creation events is a good way to detect this. This here is a SnapAttack community detection, again, part of the Sigma repository. Looking at this in the Sigma view, because I think it's a little easier to understand, this is looking for an image that ends with chisel.exe. So if the attacker really didn't do anything and rename the binary, that's possibly the lowest of low-hanging fruit. So that's that selection image. And really what we're looking at here and what we're going to hit on is all of the selection params. We can see here, remember, if we go back to that process graph, this PowerShell.exe is where this is hitting. And we can see the multiple commands here. It's going to make a temp directory, it's going to wget and download Tanium update service, and then it's going to run and execute that. So we can see here that this is seeing that exe client, part of the command line, and we're going to see that it can hit on some of these other, parts of that. So again, part of the reason with SnapAttack, why we always talk about this, is you need to test your detections, you need to validate them. This one, in essence, we kind of got lucky that it validated, simply because it was in here in that PowerShell string that just so happened that exe and client were together and unquoted. The reason that didn't fire here on the actual process creation event is because that command line path was quoted. So that exe has a double quote in there before client, which is going to break that detection rule. This is one of the things we always talk about here is just robustness, making sure it's going to respond to different variations of the attack. So really with SnapAttack, again, this is how we empower our enterprise customers and partners like Avertium. How can we create higher quality, better detections that are going to be able to respond to some of those attack variations and make sure that they are actually detecting what we want? So I have our true positive event log here. I can go and I can pivot over to our detection builder. This is going to bring the target EDR log into our interface. And here on the left side, we can actually build this detection. So as I mentioned, that binary name is very easy to rename. It's probably not going to be chisel.exe in the real world. Tanium update service is what this particular attacker was using, but if you are a CrowdStrike customer or SentinelOne, or they saw other, EDRs or endpoints, they could certainly, use a tool like that. So more than likely that image is going to be masquerading. So I'm not going to even include that in my version of this detection. I do like this command line though, and this is going to be much harder for them to obfuscate. So I can pull this command line over. You're going to see that this is going to bring this here. This is actually matching on that full exact string, which is not what we're going to want. We're going to want that to contain different pieces here. Client and server, I could certainly try those. That could be very noisy, but it is definitely something that we can look at. Again, one of those things we always talk about is testing. So I do believe, based on reading the documentation, using that reverse SOX would be an opportunity for detection. The server was, again, running on our attacker, so we're really looking at the client. And sometimes writing detections is easy as reading the manual and looking for usage. So fingerprint, they strongly recommend. Again, this is going to validate against a certificate, so we may want to include that string in our detection. I could certainly also look for other opportunities here. We see proxy as one command line option, so that one isn't in here. So we can include proxy. What other stuff? Again, as an attacker, I am lazy, and we've also seen other attackers that get lazy. So if I don't want to use a valid TLL certificate, I want to use something that's self-signed, I could certainly throw that in here as well. And again, we're going to look for any of these values. So we can already see here what this is going to be matching on. We can look in SnapAttack in our true positive attack database to see how many times this hits in the real world or hits in our library. If you have configured integrations, we can see how many times this is going to hit in the real world. We call that field validated. Even here in this our attack library, because we have that client here, we can see that this is going to be too noisy. This has already hit 6,380 times. That's not going to work. So I'm going to remove that one here from the detection. We can see that that translation was updated on the fly. Let's take a look. Let's see if this one is a little bit better tuned, how many times that this is going to hit. So this is going to hit 2 times. We can see that is hitting, and this is actually going to hit on that log that we were looking at before, that Tanium update service. So if I was happy with this, if I tested this again with my integrations, I could go ahead, I could enter the additional metadata here, give it a title, description, map it to MITRE ATT&CK, the references. I could save that, I could publish that, and then I could manage my deployment and push this out to my configured integrations. So this is really just a quick peek behind the scenes of how we do this process for detection engineering. Like I mentioned before with Avertium and their threat intelligence, we are a partner. SnapAttack is that detection as code platform, and we use our SnapAttack detections to help make their MSSP, their MXDR, their Fusion MXDR more effective. And again, this is how we can stay ahead of threats like the ransomware gang here, like Chisel, like CrackMapExec. We understand what those threats are. We understand and emulate those behaviors in our platform. We test, we validate those. We make sure that they're high confidence. For organizations like Avertium, where you're going to see a lot of alerts daily and have to triage those, having the most effective detections is going to be really important, as well as for large enterprise customers. We're always talking about alert fatigue and being able to manage that backlog. And SnapAttack really allows you to create those quickly, to validate those, to have that confidence, and to really stay ahead of the threat. So that's our pitch for today. Thank you for joining the Snapshot. This is a weekly series. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.